No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any educational program, activity receiving federal financial assistance. These words were written more than 40 years ago by Patsy Mink, a U.S. Congresswoman from Hawaii and the principal author of Equal Opportunity Education Act. It's a subsection of a larger bill, the Education Amendment of 1972, signed into law by President Richard Nixon. But in that mass of legislation, Title IX spoke specifically to women in intercollegiate athletics. Hi, I'm Nancy Lieberman, Title IX baby and Basketball Hall of Famer. Like any new law, Title IX was open-ended, full of ambiguous wording and lacking specific detail. Did this mean that American colleges and universities would be required to allow women to play football? Well, years later, we simply came to know the law, one that provided a true equal playing field, giving the same opportunities to women that were given to men. They began to play under those rules in the academic and athletic season of 1972 and 73. Today, we shine our spotlight on Title IX. 40 years later, and we have assembled a power panel of women's basketball giants from the Big 12 Conference. This roundtable discussion includes Texas Tech basketball coaching great Marsha Sharp, a 2003 inductee into the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. She led the Lady Raiders to the 1993 National Championship in 23 seasons at Tech. From '83 to 2006, she won 557 games, 8 conference championships. Texas coaching legend Jody Conradt, the second woman to ever be inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. In her 38-year coaching career, 31 of those were spent at Texas. She won 900 games. Her 1986 team was the first to win an NCAA championship with a perfect record. At one point, her Longhorns won 183 consecutive Southwest Conference games and 8 straight league titles. Baylor's Sophia Young, the Big 12's 4th all-time leading scorer, enjoyed a 2005 season that saw her named All-American while leading Baylor to its first national championship. Now a WNBA All-Star with the San Antonio Silver Spurs, Young earned her teaching degree from Baylor and a master's degree in 2011. And Oklahoma's Whitney Hand. In 2010, she led the Sooners to the Final Four while being named the Big 12 Freshman of the Year. Newly wedded, she is Mrs. Landry Jones, married to the OU quarterback. Her senior season, was cut short by injuries in December. Today's roundtable discussion of Title IX is moderated by veteran women's basketball broadcaster and Fox Sports analyst Brenda VanLengen.
Jody, you were playing basketball and other sports in high school before Title IX was ever enacted. You were actually the head coach at Sam Houston State when it was enacted. Can you tell us a little bit about your background during that time before Title IX?
I grew up in a real small Texas town, and everybody played sports. I assumed that was happening across the country. I didn't realize that I was one of the fortunate ones, had an opportunity to play on a basketball team, to really be involved at the high school level. And then when I started my coaching career, it was totally different, because I then found that there were very few opportunities for women to continue their career. To tell you and give you a reference point, on those first collegiate teams I coached, if you had a car, you made the team because we needed your car to get to the games.
I love that. What do you guys think when you hear that? you had a car, you could have made the team, right?
Man.
No, well,
I wish it was that easy still.
yeah, I know. If everything was so simple.
Well, and Marsha, you played guard back in the 3-on-3 basketball days in high school, and then we're at Wayland Baptist, where Title IX came into being kind of in that transition time between you being a player and a coach. But Wayland Baptist was known for its women's basketball for years and years, from airplane flights to great uniforms and all those things. Tell us about your perspective prior to Title IX.
Well, it was certainly a different time. Women's opportunities were not near as great as they are now. There weren't scholarships even at a program like Wayland. That was one of the best ones in the country at that time in a small school setting. No scholarships really there. People paid their own way and came and did what they had to be able to play on the team. We played junior colleges a lot when we were at Wayland because they were the only people that had teams. Not any of the major colleges in the country even fielded women's teams at that time. So to say that it was a dramatic change when Title IX came is an understatement, because there were so many things that became possible that had never been possible before.
If you had to describe, not only from your perspective, but just what you know about what was happening in programs across the country, what was it like during that time when the legislation was being discussed? How far behind were girls and women as far as opportunities?
I think it was dramatic. I don't think there's any question. As Marsha alluded to, there were no scholarships. There were no travel budgets. You played because you loved the sport. You played in obscurity. And it was something that people did with passion. It was something that was available if you looked for the opportunities, but certainly it all changed with Title IX. It was not an easy transition because suddenly women were in a non-traditional role, both as coaches and administrators, but certainly if there were resources that were being spent for men's sports, then part of that had to be diverted over to the women, and that caused some difficulty. You sort of felt like you were treading in an area that you didn't belong, and there were a lot of things that you had to overlook, both as a coach and certainly the players as well. But they were so motivated to play and so happy to have the opportunity that they let nothing stand in their way.
And at that time in the early 70s, Marsha, do you remember the legislation being enacted? Was it announced across? Did you have parties to celebrate it, or how did that come about that you even knew that the legislation was enacted?
I think we knew. It wasn't something that you openly celebrated, probably because people were trying to keep you from doing things because of it. I can remember in those early days, after it was law, didn't mean that everybody was very excited about the fact that it happened. There were many examples of times, particularly in sports where you shared a facility, that it was very tough to get the hours or to be able to do the right thing by the law standards, when people were so adamant that they not be disrupted, that men really didn't want to be disrupted by the women's teams. One story that I'm still just amazed about, a school that's within the Big 12 Conference now had a men's basketball coach that was on the floor practicing. We were there to play a game that evening, and our game was delayed an hour because they didn't finish practicing in time. Well, you can imagine that now if that were to happen.
Oh my goodness.
It was a fairly common occurrence in those days. The men kind of decided when we could get there and when we couldn't. So, to say that there were some transitional problems, I think would be accurate. There were some things that were very difficult at times to try to overcome.
And we'll get back to some of that as we kind of progress through time. But as you sit here and listen to this, Whitney, did you realize that there was a time when girls and women didn't have the opportunities that you do?
It's something that I heard growing up, I think my whole life. It was, this isn't normal. Don't take advantage of it. This is, a blessing, a privilege. And, as a little girl, we had youth programs that were well developed. I was a part of a great program in Granbury, Texas, that they had an all-star team, they had gyms ready for you. So I think growing up as an athlete, I didn't really realize until I got to college and learned exactly what my program and every program across the country, how hard they worked and how hard all of these coaches that I've been recruited by have worked to allow me to have this opportunity. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been, oh my goodness, just overwhelmed and really grateful for this awesome opportunity.
And just for perspective, what year were you born?
I was born in 1989, so
All right.
17 years after Title IX.
Very good, very good. And Sophia, I know we don't like to reveal our age, but would you share with us what year you were born?
I was born in '83.
In '83. So what's your perspective? Did you realize that there were times when women didn't have the opportunities they did now?
No, I didn't. Mostly because I was born in the Caribbean and I grew up there. And in the Caribbean, we all had equal choices and chances to play sports. And I remember, playing with the guys, playing soccer, with a volleyball, running track, and there wasn't any difference at all in terms of who can have what and who can have anything. I did notice it whenever I came to America at the age of 15. Whenever we had also situations with men and their practice time and our practice time, and when we can't get on the floor, if the guys weren't finished running their 10 and 2s or running their laps, so we couldn't get on until they were absolutely finished, and we're like, well, we have a game, let's but like that's something that I didn't notice until I came to America. But then again, there's a lot of things that's different in America than it is in other parts of the world.
So when Title IX came into existence 40 years ago, did you think it was going to change things? And you've talked earlier about some of the obstacles that you faced. Can you describe some of the things maybe in the first 10, 15, 20 years of the law that you really had to face, Marsha?
Well, I think first of all, we had to develop some teams and programs that could compete, because the major colleges had not had even a team until that point. So it took some time to catch up, I think, for the game to catch up in the larger programs in the country. And certainly we went through a couple of phases with AIW and then into the NC2A, which were big moments, I think, when we made the transition. But there were a lot of things that within the universities themselves that had to be defined. Were we going to give the full scholarships that were available now? Were we going to do the same things from a travel perspective, or from the scholarships themselves, or from the time that we were on the floor for practice and things like that? So a lot of people, some that came right before me and some administrators around the country, you have to give those people so much credit, because they fought some wars that were not fun. I mean, they really stood up and took some hits at times, and really did some things that were important to lay the groundwork for coaches and athletes to play, that they probably never did get as much credit as they deserve for making that transition and trying to fight the hard battles that they did.
You and Donna Lopiano were known for working through so many things and really leading the way through the 80s especially. What was some of the most resistance that you met, and some of the things that you had to overcome?
Well, I think there was a perception that money being diverted from men's programs, and specifically football, was going to have a huge impact. And if you were at a university like the University of Texas, you did not want to do anything to diminish football. So we still have a very unique situation on our campus. We have 2 athletic directors, 2 athletic departments, and that was a result of our funding coming from the president's office, so that it was certain that men's funds would not be diverted to the women. And that created a unique opportunity for us to develop our own specific program with the needs of the student athletes as the highest priority. But we still have that structure today. And believe it or not, because the law was not clearly written, I mean, it's a very, as we see it in the background, it doesn't say you have to do this, this, and this. The interpretation was very difficult for a lot of institutions. And therefore, even as late as the 90s, the University of Texas was sued by 6 women students who said, you haven't offered enough sport opportunities. At that point in time, women's athletics had won 18 national championships across the board in various sports. and our budget was probably larger than anyone in the country. But if we could be proven to be negligent in providing opportunities, then you can see how even that long after the laws passed, there's still times that we have to rely on the federal law that says everyone should have an opportunity.
Sophia, you talked about how growing up in the Caribbean that you did not see the inequities, but when you came to the United States, there were some of those. Can you think of any specific times when you noticed specifically that the boys were getting some opportunities that you weren't?
Well, first of all, like Coach mentioned with football, I went to Evangel Christian Academy, and we were in the 5A division, not because the women's team was good, but because the football team was great. So we won state every year in football, but we got killed in basketball. And I mean, to us, it was such a drastic difference. We were like, why are we in this league when we can't compete with the other schools? But I mean, just differences, simple things like that, and just differences. And I mean, just being around campus and see all the hype that the male players got, and and the fans that came to our games compared to the guys' games. And I mean, to us, it was so crazy that could actually happen. So.
And I know things were pretty good for you, Whitney, and I mean, you were part of this progress that was being made, but were there any times that you had any instances that you felt like the boys were getting more opportunities than you?
I wouldn't say opportunities. I really felt like it was pretty equal opportunity-wise. I think definitely the fan attendance and things like that, those aren't, it's kind of like, it's just there wasn't much interest, and I don't think that meant there wasn't enough opportunity. It just there wasn't enough interest. So I think being a part of that development of women's basketball, these two women got hundreds and thousands of people to come to their games, and I think in that way the women's basketball as a whole is really just improving and growing. I mean, we've gotten to play in front of sellout crowds because of what they've done, and even though maybe I didn't get that many people in high school, I still felt like there were the opportunities there. But I do think interest is where the focus seems to be.
As we continue on with our discussion on the 40th anniversary of Title IX, how did the two of you first get involved with sports? Who introduced you to sports?
My father, definitely. As you mentioned, he played professional baseball and played some basketball in college, so I grew up around it. I mean, I played all the sports. My family was very competitive, so I played Little Dribblers basketball, YMCA soccer, and even ran some track, even though that's a little surprising.
Not surprising at
all. For me, it was my uncle, but I didn't start playing basketball until I was 15. So I ran track when I was growing up, and I played volleyball and soccer. We played against the guys all the time growing up.
Because you didn't play basketball in the Caribbean.
I did not, no.
That you played handball, correct?
Netball.
Netball.
Mm-hmm. Netball is actually starting to get big, around the world. Not America, maybe sooner or later it will come. But it's a sport that's similar to basketball. It's just no dribbling, and only girls play. So, and that sport was very well known in the Caribbean, and we had a lot of attendance. Maybe which is why I said that there wasn't any difference, within male and female with their sports, because every sport that we play, we had a lot of turnout and a lot of opportunities growing up.
Good. So in terms of women's basketball, as we go through our chronology here, as you think back to the moments where there were big milestones, were there any real moments that you felt were game changers that really vaulted the progress for women because of Title IX? Jody, you want to start?
Well, I think you have to look back at 1982 when the NCAA really started to embrace women's sports, and that was the first year that they hosted a basketball championship. Ironically, there were two championships that year because, as Marsha talked earlier, the women, in an attempt to develop our own leagues and our own method of competition, we had an organization called the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And we made our own rules. They were quite different from the NCAA rules that we know today. But in that last year, once NCAA decided to host a championship, AIAW didn't shut down immediately. So there was a transition year, and actually I coached a team in the Final Four of the AIAW while others were playing in the Final Four for the NCAA. And that was a very critical time. At that time, I was very upset. I wanted to play in the NCAA tournament because I thought that's where the best competition was going to be. But in retrospect, I feel really proud of the fact that my institution said on principle, we're going to play one more year before we just hand over what we've worked so hard to build to the men's model. But certainly that changed everything for women's sports when NCAA said, okay, there's enough interest now, we'll have a championship.
Yeah, and that was such an important time too, and we still are behind on collecting stats from those years because there were women that played in the 70s and the early 80s that are no longer in the record books because they played in the AIAW instead of the NCAA. So there's still some things that have to be done to recognize some of those, but that was a big change as far as the next chapter in women's sports. Any other game changers from your perspective, Marsha?
Well, there were a couple that I point to, one a little bit more recent, but first of all, let me say, because this needs to be said, that what they did at Texas was an amazing step for women's basketball to have the success they had during the 80s and really took the sport to a different level. It was what everybody chased. Everybody in the country chased them. They used them for their model. They knew that what they were doing to try to provide opportunities was among the best in the country. Actually, it was the best one in the country. And for all of us, it was something that we tried to emulate all the time. And we didn't emulate it very well. We didn't beat them for 10 years, but you caught up. It was a
fun times for me.
It was and as I've said before, I wrote my resignation out about 6 times during that time, thinking I can't do this anymore. But they did some amazing things for the sport. The other time that I think was a little bit more recent that was a real help to us were the '96 Olympics. I thought that national team and the fact that they toured the country, that Tara took a year off from coaching her Stanford team to do that, was really a time when women's basketball went to a little bit different level. They were more household names. Everybody knew better. The players that were involved, the television coverage got a little bit stronger. So I thought those were some big times.
Welcome back to Spotlight, Title IX. 40 years later, I'm Nancy Lieberman. We now return to our Big 12 Power Panel discussing the 40th anniversary of the landmark legislation offering equal opportunities to women in collegiate athletics, along with Texas Tech coaching legend Marsha Sharp, Texas great Jody Conradt, Baylor All-American Sophia Young, and recent Oklahoma star Whitney Hand. Here again is Brenda VanLengen.
Whitney, your career was cut short by injury. What are your plans now, and how does having this opportunity, this experience playing in the Big 12, how does that help you for your future?
Well, I have no idea what my future holds professionally, but I do know that I feel like we've always said you become who you're going to be in college. These years are the years that shape you. And I remember my dad telling me that go to somewhere where it's going to shape you into the woman you want to be. And I know through adversity, through those locker rooms where you feel like the world's going to end, and to the highest of highs mountains, where it's just
coaches
joyful.
have a way to make you feel like the world's going to end. Right, coaches?
Yeah, those newspaper articles.
Definitely building you.
But it truly does, and just even conflict and, injury and setback and disappointment, those things, I feel like the character that I've developed and the woman I've become, through playing obviously in this conference and for my university, it's just set me up. I feel like, you're just gonna be successful. You've just learned how to be successful in life, and I believe in that for all of my teammates and all the women I play against. You know, you get such an advantage from being here and from going through this that it's almost like you feel kind of invincible. You just feel like these women have set you up to be successful the rest of your lives.
Excellent. Yes, Sophia?
No, but I think it's just what you said, invincible. I think the coaches do such a great job to make you feel like you are the best in the world and the best at your job. And I mean, for the Big 12, I know obviously in every team there's like that star player, maybe one or two, that, you know, they just feel like going out there every night that they are invincible. But I think the coaches has that power that they put in those players' head to make them feel that way, and you know, it also equipped you for any other challenges that you go through in life. You know, if you work hard and you put forth the effort, if you have people in your life to support you, then you can do anything.
And you know that there are hundreds of women just like
Yeah,
this.
they feel this. We all feel the same way.
No, that you've influenced. After you're done with your career, yes.
I just look at the two of them and listen to them, and you have to be impressed. I mean, you think about the qualities that they so obviously possess, and you think about the experiences they've had. You think about how poised they are, the confidence that they show. And I know from watching their successful careers that the work ethic, the accountability that they will assume in anything that they choose to do from this point forward. All of those qualities, I think, are the very qualities that are fostered and encouraged through team sports in particular. And I know from experience that those are the same qualities that people look for when they go out to hire people. They can see success written in these two women as they can so many of them that have had the sports experience.
That's true. Over these last 40 years of Title IX, what are you most proud of, Marsha?
Oh, I think two things. First of all, the growth of the sport and the popularity of it. I think the fact that when we started, we were playing in front of 50 people. We knew every one of them. Had told them we weren't giving them Christmas gifts if they didn't come. You know, to the point where, you know, there were literally thousands that watched all of us coach and play. That is really rewarding to me. I think it was a very special time. But the other thing is exactly what Jody just alluded to on such a much bigger scale. What Title IX has done for women. And part of that is women who have played sports, and certainly that's what we're talking about today. But when you think about all the people that you will impact, your children, your siblings, people around you who probably look at opportunities for women so differently now than they did when we first came out of school or before Title IX. It's an amazing thing to see the confidence and the opportunities that are available now that pre-Title IX were not even on anybody's radar screen. They didn't have any idea that they were even out there or that there was any way for them to get them. Maybe some elite programs, some elite people, but to have that across the board for any young girl, no matter what circumstances she grows up in, to have an opportunity to come and do and be what these guys are is really, I mean, how could you not be proud of that and so thrilled that that's happened in our country?
Well, up next, we'll talk about what still needs to be done.
You know, it's going to be an ongoing battle, I think, for people to continue to attempt to keep the game strong.
We are much better athletically and much worse fundamentally.
You know, it's all about me. It's all about me. That I feel like when it gets to college, you have to break that, and it's about the team again.
Maybe, you know, I think eventually it may come around where, you know, we can make enough money to stay in America.
As we wrap up our discussion on the 40th anniversary of Title IX, and we've had such a great discussion during the course of the day, and really all the great things that have been accomplished over the last 40 years, but there's still work that needs to be done, and we'll just kind of go around with everybody. Marsha, what do you think still needs to be done?
Well, first of all, I think we have to continue to educate and not forget the past. I think sometimes we tend to go past it too quickly, and maybe this generation doesn't really have a full grasp of what kind of a price was paid to maybe do what we're talking about doing today. The second thing is I think we have to protect that game, and I think we all felt like we were caretakers of the game when we were doing it, and now we pass that torch to different generations, and whatever that means, the image of the game, the rules of the game, anything that has to change to try to make sure that it's something that people stay incredibly excited about, those are all things that we need to do. So it's not ever going to end. It's going to be an ongoing battle, I think, for people to continue to attempt to keep the game strong, the one that we love and that we're passionate about.
Jody?
I think there's a lot that we can do around the sport. We have figured out how to give athletes scholarships, how to recruit the best, and to put them in an environment where they can showcase their talent. But we need to continue to build a fan support. And that happens in departments where there's a marketing effort, where the communication is important. So all of those things that have happened on the men's side need to be in place to support the women. Because yes, if people come to see a game that's played at a high level, then they're going to come back. But we have to have that exposure. That happens through television. It happens through all kinds of communication that's available to us now. So I'd like to see all of our gymnasiums full. I'd like to see those fans really have the experience of following outstanding women's teams. I also think that we need to continue to develop on the officiating side. I can say that now. I've seen the level of play continually rise. I haven't seen the level of the officiating stay on task with that. We don't have enough officials. We don't have an education system for officials where they get better and better and adjust to the level of our play. I'd also like to see us not get away from teaching the fundamentals. These young women had very good fundamentals, but that's not happening everywhere. We've gone away from working in the summer, working on your own, developing individual skills. Now we just play all the time. And I've seen an erosion of the individual skills fundamentally that our players have. We're much better athletically and much worse fundamentally. So I think that needs some attention.
Somebody that's worked a lot on her fundamentals, Sophia, because you've just gotten better and better each year, even in your professional career. But as you look at this issue, what do you think needs to improve?
Like Coach Sharp said, I think that we still need to be educated every day because as college athletes now, I think that most college athletes don't even know what Title IX is. And they don't know like the steps that they was taken to get them to this level, and I think we have to still be educated. And from the pride standpoint, I think we still have to play and be great representative of women who are playing, knowing that there was a lot of work that was put in for me to have this opportunity. And from a professional standpoint, being in the WNBA, most of us have to go to Europe in order to keep up our game, or for financially. So maybe I think eventually it may come around where we can make enough money to stay in America to keep our career. But most of us have to go overseas in order to keep that up. But maybe if we get 5% as much as the NBA players get, then that could maybe
that'd be a good deal.
That would be a good deal. But mostly I think we still need to be very educated about what Title IX is and the work that was put in to get us there.
Very good. Whitney?
Well, it's a little unfair to go last.
Right. All these great ideas already, right?
I know. So I'm going to take a few of all of them. No, I think protecting the game, just in my perception, just women's basketball is women's basketball. It's not men's basketball. They're different. And I think our fans are women's basketball fans. They love women's basketball. And when we try to make it a poor man's men's game, then it doesn't even compete. So I think it's protecting our game. It's teaching fundamentals. It's not just going and playing. It's being who we are uniquely as women, and it's something special about that. So that's probably, I have two 15-year-old sisters, and I see them in the July circuit, and they play 100 games a year, and it's exhausting, and it's kind of become more about me and how I can show myself and you know, who's seeing me, instead of let's go win an AAU national championship as a team. And I think you see that a little bit in teams now. I know I have within my team, and even within myself a little bit. There's a sense of entitlement, a sense of, you know, it's all about me, that I feel like when it gets to college, you have to break that, and it's about the team again. So that's kind of, I think, where I would put the focus, is just developing those young players with the right mindset, educating them, protecting our game, and truly, you know, teaching them how women's basketball should be played.
Back in the development of Title IX, whenever you guys started, and I'm not sure if you won any championship during that time, but how were you received from the public or from the men's sports whenever you started with the women's sports? And how? That's
an interesting question. I think there was a little bit of resentment, and it happened on a lot of campuses, because Title IX, again, the guidelines were not clearly defined, but one way that it was measured to determine whether you were in compliance with the law was to look at participation slots. All right, if you think about football, there's 120, and I'm just pulling that number out because that's a number that we talk about a lot. So there are 120 slots for guys to play football. There is no women's sport that has 120 spots. So there was a difference in terms of how do you balance that. Well, one way that schools did it was to say you could not have walk-ons on men's teams. Well, you can imagine that these are people who eat in the same cafeteria, who see each other across campus, and suddenly one of the guys has had to give up his sport so that you could comply with Title IX. So there was a little bit of backlash, and particularly, as I mentioned earlier, during our time when we were sued to add 3 additional sports. And we settled that lawsuit and said, you're right, we do need to add softball, we need to add soccer, and we need to add rowing. But it's a continual balancing act to figure out how do you provide the same number of opportunities for women as you do men, and you don't want to do that at the detriment of men losing their opportunity. So that becomes a really important issue with administrators and on the various campuses.
Yeah. I want to know how, I know you said there's different athletic departments at Texas back in that time, but how was the money raised? Like, I know there weren't huge marketing, you know, it's like you were the marketing firm, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you promoted your team. So how did you both go about promoting that and getting all the fans and all of that?
Because our departments were separate. Okay, the men had their pile of money to make it as simple as possible. Women's athletics was funded from the president's office. So he had money, then he funded the women's program. And we remained that way for a number of years, simply to make a smooth transition so that there wasn't any hard feelings, particularly from people who supported football. We don't want our football program to be diluted in any way. And so it was a political balancing act. Eventually, because football was making plenty of money to not only support football, but to support all of the men's sports, then it didn't make sense. Well, because boys play football, let's give all the money to guys. It didn't make sense. So eventually everybody got together and said, okay, we have money, let's spread it out. And we did come together in certain areas, but we still have 2 athletic directors and 2 staffs to promote the various sports. And the advantage of that is that the highest priority with the women's athletic director is women's sports. And the highest priority with the men's athletic director is men's sports. So it's an ideal situation for the University of Texas. It is unique to our environment and probably wouldn't work on a lot of other campuses, but we have that as a holdover.
Well, and exactly, and Texas Tech.
Well, Whitney, I think you can probably see that those administrators were incredibly important, and you had to try to build some relationships with them. And a while ago I said there were a lot of people who fought battles. Some of those were men. who were in some of those positions, but that's why there was such a discrepancy from school to school. That president's office or your vice president of student affairs would make decisions about what money was going to be allocated to women's sports during those days, and so that's why everybody got off to a little bit of an uneven start, because some schools believed very strongly in women's ability and right to do that, and some still today honestly struggle with it in some ways. So that was a really big deal. As far as trying to build a fan base, I think most of the coaches who coached during that period of time will tell you that it came down a lot of times to building one relationship at a time, going out and finding people who would support your program and bring 10 with them or bring 100 with them, or whatever it might be. It was just very tedious to try to build that fan base, and we did a lot of things. Had programming after games, before games, went to a lot of kids' birthday parties and things like that, to build relationships with people in the communities. And I do think that's something we don't need to get away from. I think it kind of separates women's sports a little bit from men in the fact that we can be more personally engaged. They want to know you as a person, and I think that's a separating factor even today.
Do you remember your first sellout?
I remember that the first Final Four that was a sellout was at the University of Texas.
Okay.
And I remember standing under that sign on the outside of the building that said sold out. So we were hosting Final Fours on our individual campuses at that point in time instead of in neutral sites the way we are today.
Ours was against Texas A&M. Yeah, and it was a great day. I mean, every seat full, and it was an amazing thing, and something that we had spent a long time in our careers, my coaches and I and all of our administrators at Tech, to try to make happen. So what a great day, a memory you never forget.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I think almost everyone played double headers. You were the prelim to the men's game. And, there was one time we go to Texas A&M, and when we get there, there is a line of students outside the building, and we go in and we start the game, and they don't let the students in because they've lined up for the men's game.
Wow.
So we start the game, and it is in dead silence. There is no one in the gym. And about halftime, they opened the door, and so one half we played in absolute isolation. The second half, you know how loud the Aggies are. I'm telling you, our players could not get their arm up above their head to shoot. That was the first time I remember actually having a crowd in the gymnasium, but it was only for a half.
Coach Shop, you played 3-on-3.
I did.
You guys must have been in great shape then.
No, you know what? You can only play half court. Not full court, half court. So, and I was a guard, so that tells you my chances when I got to college are not very good, because I wasn't a very good shooter.
Is a defender.
Okay,
and a forward is an offensive player.
That's right.
Because women couldn't run the whole way.
Yeah.
It was too strenuous for them.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It was actually 6-on-6 with three guards and 3 forwards.
Oh, wow.
Very interesting game.
She wasn't in the United States.
Yeah.
You're not going to give your son more money than you give your daughter. And that has happened over time, and it's, I think, something that you can put in very simplistic terms. If it's fair for my son, it's fair for my daughter, and I don't want there to be a distinction between the two. But I noticed when you were talking about netball being for women only, we still have those allowances made for women because they're not talented enough, right? We have a smaller basketball. We have a lower net in volleyball. So there's still a perception that you have to make some kind of concession for women to be athletic and competitive. And I think as we move away and we see what women can actually do, that those kinds of things need to go away as well.
I was just going to ask you the question, why do you think your fans love women's basketball so much?
I think it's because they believe in Sherry Cole. They've believed in her. I mean, our program was cut for a couple days in the 90s. I think it was 1990. And I've heard, you hear that when you come to Oklahoma, the alumni program and, you know, the people who have come before you are most important. They are on every wall. You play for them. And Coach Cole's really done a good, I mean, like you said, literally building a relationship one person at a time. And it's, you know, yeah, at Oklahoma, I feel like the fans truly love me. Like they would bring me into their home and love me as a daughter. And it's the same on the road. We have the same 100 people that show up, and they are so dedicated, and they are the best. I mean, and I think it's exactly what you said, though, is building those relationships.
I think it's about the fundamentals. I know even in the professional world now, the fans that come out, they say that they like women's basketball more than men because of the fundamentals that the women have, and most of that men is just like a showboard, you know. They play above the rim, and we actually do layups and stuff. So it's just about like the fundamentals and how much pride we take into playing the game, actually.
Did you have a question, Jody?
No, I was going to make a comment earlier. You know, one of the things that perpetuates these opportunities is I know that your dad, watching you grow up and watching you love the sport, if he had not thought you were going to have an opportunity, he would have gotten out there and done something about it. And I think this is what has to continue to happen. You, other parents, other people who want their children to have special opportunities, have to be the people who push it forward. We can't take steps backwards, and I think that we're going to see a generation of young people who have played the sport, and we're going to raise children who take it for granted, but you're going to remember that this is something that it's been important in your life, and you're not going to let a generation move forward without having that same opportunity.
I know for some of the professional players, like they would say, like, I don't want to come to a women's game or something and watch women's sport, but probably because they don't have any kids right now. But whenever they do have daughters, they are going to want to be involved, and you push them forward to you know be the best that they can be. And so I do agree with you that it is going to be a generation of where the young people are going to grow up where they're going to learn from their parents and stuff. So.
And you know, in talking about the money thing and everything, it goes back to money. I mean, unfortunately, that's just the way it is. But I think if you make the argument, you're not going to give your son more money than you give your daughter. And that has happened over time. And it's, I think, something that you can put in very simplistic terms. If it's fair for my son, it's fair for my daughter, and I don't want there to be a distinction between the two.
What a fascinating conversation, and I think all three of us thank you, both of you, so much for all you've done, and the people before you, as you said, that blazed the trails, but the opportunities wouldn't be there for any of us had you two not done the things that you did to set the standard and to fight the battles, and we just want to thank you so much. And I also want to thank both Sophia and Whitney, because you're the two type of young women that will be the torchbearers into the next generation. And so this is a passing of the torch in some ways. And exactly, we should have. I mean, it's a great opportunity because we know the game is in good hands with you two, passing it on to the next generation.